This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is James Arnold Taylor, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi. I have a good feeling about this.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to Coffee with Kenobi, show number 366. We are your spoiler-free place for Star Wars discussion, analysis, and rhetoric. I'm your host, Dan Z, drinking One Nation coffee out of my black and orange Rancho Obi-Wan coffee mug, excited to once again talk some Star Wars with each and every one of you. On today's very special show, we've got the dream team of the Star Wars book. It's myself, Pablo Hidalgo, Cole Horton, and Matt Jones, our project editor, together talking about this book, the behind the scenes of it, the surprises that may be in store for the book, and so much more. This is an absolute Coffee with Kenobi exclusive. You will not hear the four of us anywhere else together, so it's time for some fun. Pull up a chair, grab your favorite coffee mug, and let's have some Coffee with Kenobi.
So who talks first? You talk first? I talk first?
This is a really special show for me. Joining us for a cup of coffee are the creators behind the Star Wars book. First, a returning guest. He's been working as a Star Wars authority at Lucasfilm for over 20 years, of course, Pablo Hidalgo.
Hey, Dan, thanks for having me.
Hey, my pleasure, buddy. It's great to have you back on the show, and it's just an honor to write this book alongside you and the other co-author of the Star Wars book, Mr. Cole Horton, who is also a returning guest, and he's the author of over a dozen Star Wars books. He's just a great guy to chat with online or in person. Of course, I'm talking about Mr. Cole Horton.
Hey, Dan, it's good to be here.
So great to have you. Thank you for coming back on the show, having a cup of coffee with us. Speaking of a cup of coffee, our other friend, it's his podcast debut. This is, of course, Matt Jones. He is our project editor, and he is up the latest because we've got a 4 time zone crunch going on here, but we're going to make it work. Matt, welcome to Coffee with Kenobi.
Hi there. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you on. So, gentlemen, we'll just get right to it. The first question is, how did the idea for this book come about, and what makes it different from other Star Wars guides? And Pablo, we'll just start with you on that one.
Well, I mean, in terms of its origin or its genesis, I kind of defer to Matt, but I know that there have been examples of a book like this. We had a couple of touchstones when we started this project because DK had done a Star Trek version and a Marvel version of this book. And what makes it quite different from some of our other Star Wars source books is that it's much more of an overview. It steps back from being just distinctly focused on one film or one project, and it's really more of a primer, getting you a look at the whole of the story. But Matt, I don't know if you want to talk about why was the right time to do a Star Wars one or how it came about.
No, that's a great explanation, Pablo. Yeah, definitely. I think we kind of, it's one of the series. I think it was a perfect time after Rise of the Skywalker came out. Great time to kind of give that step back and kind of prime people that are kind of maybe just discovering Star Wars and wanting to know a bit more about the Force in kind of detail, in a sense that, perhaps you might not know if you're just watching 1 or 2 films, but also kind of provide that stuff that I think fans will really love as well, those kind of great examples and really in-depth analysis.
And Cole, what about you? You, of course, have written a number of Star Wars books. Was there sort of a different feel that you had as you were creating your entries for this book?
Oh, yeah. I mean, probably in 2 ways. You had more of the essay style in this book, which was new. In fact, for me, I was coming off a different book I had written that was a list style. So you couldn't get more different than short blurbs moving into this essay format, but it allows you to tell so much more of a rich story and connect so many more dots. The other way, though, that it's different is the more infographic style additions we were able to make. So there's so many concepts that you really can't describe very well in words, right? And taking something off the screen and trying to explain that concept to people, it was so much easier to have these diagrams that we could kind of invent for those times where you just need to tell that story more visually. So I appreciated both of those pieces of this book.
Definitely. And when people have asked me what makes it different, I had said, well, I consider other books as sort of what it is. that kind of thing. But I've looked at this as sort of the how and the why that it works, because you are able to dive more deeply and more analytically into this. And as you just said, Cole and Matt, of course, when you first introduced this book to us, a series of curated essays that go together to break Star Wars down. And of course, Star Wars fans love doing that anyway. So for Matt, I wanted to ask you, what was the thought process like as far as who should work on the Star Wars book, and how did you decide to divvy up the sections amongst the three of us?
Yeah, sure. I think in terms of kind of who I wanted, I was kind of really keen to get just some great authors on board, basically. So, Pablo and Cole, kind of more kind of experienced authors who, have kind of worked on DK books before, as well as you, Dan, and kind of we wanted to find somebody else to add to the title. So yeah, that was kind of a nice range of voices, I felt like. And then kind of in terms of divvying up the sections, it was kind of relatively, I tried to keep kind of chapters with certain authors. Kind of the exception was Pablo, who I kind of gave sections here or there where he could kind of particularly speak to, something that might be coming out of The Rise of Skywalker. We were writing this kind of January, so, just the film was basically out at that point, or kind of season 7 of the Clone Wars for Ahsoka and Maul. So kind of that was kind of the approach. That was the method to the madness.
I like it. Well, it worked out beautifully. I feel like we all were able to kind of play into our strengths a little bit. And I believe you'd mentioned earlier, it's just like with the Marvel book and the Star Trek book, our book is perhaps more text heavy than most DK releases, while still featuring gorgeous images and infographics. What was the rationale behind this stylistic change as far as the essays, and how is it necessary for what this book is trying to accomplish? And Matt, you can just start there if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. I think it's kind of, as Pablo and Cole both touched on as well, it's kind of that sense of you can really go in and kind of explain things that are, for me, it was the organizations. It was kind of the Jedi. We don't necessarily always have that in our other titles, that kind of long 4-page explanation of how they work, what they're doing, kind of that kind of sense for certain ones, or the Force, Dan, one of your articles, kind of setting out all these quite complicated views in kind of a nice way. So I think the long essays lend themselves kind of, or those kind of, that approach lends itself well to some of these kind of slightly more esoteric kind of subjects. But also kind of the infographics were great for that kind of, also like Cole said, kind of breaking things down and kind of the complexities of the Clone Wars, and just seeing that as a diagram and seeing how Sidious controls everything is kind of, for me, it was just like, oh yeah, okay, I can see this now.
Right.
Which is, sorry, is not great for a podcast.
No, it's excellent, because I know exactly what you're talking about. I think many of our listeners have been looking at the book and enjoying it. And Pablo, for you, since you've written so many of these and you've done those wonderful visual guides, obviously there's more words that you're putting into these different sections naturally. But how do you sort of discern what to write about? And what I think is fun and challenging particularly is to cover things that have been covered countless times, but to give them sort of a fresh sheen.
Mm-hmm. There were two big differences that this book provided, and one, as we've all talked about, is the format, and the other was the timing in terms of when it came out. So the format, I could speak in somewhat specifics, because the challenge, but also the opportunity with the visual dictionaries and the visual guides that I've done in the past is, I don't know how many people know this, but the layouts are generated first, and then I write to the layouts. And it tends to be very specifically laid out, so that I know going into it, I have 150 to 300 words to talk about, say, Baze Malbus, or 150 words to talk about his weapon, or 200 words to talk about the Guardians of the Will. Just picking an example. And this, you get suddenly 900 to 1,200 uninterrupted words to talk about a topic. So in the visual dictionary and visual guide realm, it's being very specific with those words, and often making it seem like you're giving more insight than you actually have room to give. You're choosing the right words to suggest that there's a deeper well to go exploring. And in here, you actually have the width to get out some of the bigger ideas and topics and cover something from beginning to end in a continuous thought, as opposed to scattered fragments with captions and paragraphs. Regarding timing, all the other books that I've done with DK in the visual guides and visual dictionaries have centered around a major release of a film. And for a variety of reasons, not the least of which, it's the best opportunity for that book to excel and reach the biggest readership possible. these books come out when the movie comes out, when the iron is hot, when the hype is biggest, when the excitement is at its peak. But the side effect of that is it has to go into prep and print months before the movie comes out. And we have to take into account filmmaker sensitivities. And so we often leave out a lot of third act surprises and elements from the book. That's why if you have the Force Awakens visual dictionary, there's like no Snoke content in there, because he was one of those things that the filmmakers were very protective about. Likewise, the Last Jedi book really didn't get into the action on Crate, and The Rise of Skywalker really had to dance around topics like Sidious and the Sith Eternal and the Final Order and all that stuff on Exegol. It's in there, but not as deep as it could be. Thankfully, this book did not hinge on an individual movie release. All the movies would have been out at that time, even though we started writing when it was, still kind of all coming out. But, so you're able to talk about things directly as opposed to talking around things. And that was a huge change in benefit.
Yeah, an excellent point. And Cole, for you, obviously you've got a lot of wheelhouses in the world of Star Wars, but I always look at science and technology as something like, if I want to know about this or if I want to know about history, I'm going to Cole Horton. So you're able to take your sections and really expound upon them as well, but again, with a little more license to really kind of let your creativity roam, because you've got more words that you can use. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, especially on something like science and tech, so many times you're working with this limited real estate and you're just trying to explain what a thing is, right? This is a certain piece of technology and this is its model number and maybe who made it or just a little bit on how it's used. But with so much more real estate, now you really get to put that technology in context and talk about why it's important. And most of all, why that technology changed the galaxy, right? And so, whereas in the past, you might have worked on something where you point to the hyperdrive. It makes a ship go really fast, right? And that's kind of all you get to say. But in this case, you get to talk about, hyper travel really changed how the galaxy operates and led to the expansion of governments. And that really leads to this ongoing series of conflicts that have shaped the galaxy and that, we're watching in these stories. So being able to do that, I'm talking about technology, but I've never talked about technology like this.
Right. Yeah, this medium, it lends itself. I feel, I told my wife when we started talking about this book in the initial stages, I said, I feel like this is the book I was born to write. If I was going to write a Star Wars book, of course I'm going to look at the mythology and the characters and really sort of dive deeply into the thought process and the creativity behind the many people who have helped to shape who they are in the zeitgeist of popular culture for all of us. And even if I wasn't a part of this, I would be incredibly proud and just would love what it does. And so for Cole and Pablo, and Cole, we'll start with you on this one. The two of you are obviously veteran Star Wars authors and have written extensively about this mythology. Did either of you learn or connect to anything about this franchise through this process of the Star Wars book that you may not have otherwise considered?
Yeah, for me, the biggest revelations or maybe rediscovery came in the introduction. Those 4 pages were the 4 that were written from an out-of-universe perspective. Mm-hmm. And I had 4 pages to talk about really the story of this franchise. And not its narrative story necessarily, although that's part of it, but how it came to be and how it's grown and changed and evolved over the years. And I realized that if you asked 12 Star Wars experts what the core theme of Star Wars is, you would get 12 answers, and they're probably all right in some way. But over time, I realized where the spotlight got shown is in a different place. I'll give you an example. At one point, George Lucas is working with Akira Kurosawa, whose samurai films, of course, inspired Star Wars in a big way. But during that period, right, there's so much focus on that. Or maybe the focus at some point turns to myth. And we talk a lot about how Star Wars is a modern myth and how myths of old have sort of shaped the hero's journey and things like that. And over time, kind of what we think Star Wars is has evolved. And in that intro, I was able to kind of dig all of that up and make sure that I sort of paid respect to all of those things that make Star Wars what it is, and tie it together in one place. And you could kind of not only see, when movies came out, that's part of it, but also what are those themes in totality that make it so special.
You know, the intro is one of my favorite parts of this book. And bravo to you for what you did. I think it was a very powerful, poignant way to succinctly put sort of a capstone on this to where we are to this point in the history of Star Wars. So kudos to you for that. And Pablo, what about you? Obviously, you've thought about and talked about and written about Star Wars more than all of us combined. So were there any parts of this mythology that you were doing through your entries that made you think about things in a unique way that you hadn't possibly considered?
It's not necessarily new, but it's always rewarding to see how well all this stuff fits within, one set of covers together. It wasn't always like this. I think DK honestly was the first publisher to ever show Clone Wars and live action imagery side by side back when ages ago when we first started that Ultimate Star Wars edition, and before that it was like, would this even work? Can you combine these pieces? Otherwise it was often treated as separate brands. But now with this one, as we keep adding to Star Wars, just being able to flip through a book that draws from, the 9 movies, the standalones, the animated series, and we even got some High Republic illustration in here. Having it all live together just kind of reinforces the design of Star Wars to be this grand, expansive mythology with multiple facets that, even though taken individually, can occasionally feel quite separate, but taken as a whole, you recognize the themes that continue. And the fact that this stuff does live together so well, I think this book encapsulates that. So it's rare that we have the opportunity to do that. There's a handful of titles that do this, and this is one of them.
Here. I've had a lot of great feedback, and one of the most rewarding things that I have heard is someone said, this is really dense, it's really thick, it's like a Star Wars textbook, and he said, it reminds me of how this story is so Tolkien-esque, which to me, that's about as high a praise as you could possibly provide, because I do feel like it provides this huge, expansive canvas to give everything equal weight and gravitas. And I feel like that is great for people who are either experts in lore or want to try to catch up and sort of decide, hey, I want to learn more about this. Maybe there's a comic that talks about this, and we help to provide sort of a landing place for you to kind of reset yourself. As for me, I found there were 2 sections that were incredibly rewarding to write. I mean, it was all really great, of course, but talking about the Force and having to think about how everything connects, and of course there's so many different aspects of the Force, particularly in the Clone Wars and things like that, was great, because I think that's a very reflective, profound thing that's constantly in motion, and I kind of like that it's like nailing Jello to the wall, because you can't really pin it down, but there are certain key aspects and structures of the Force, both physically and spiritually, that lend itself to it. And then I think Matt could probably vouch for me on this one. I think I emailed him the most about Leia, because as I was writing hers, I said at one point, can we make this 4 pages instead? Because there's so much about her that I didn't realize. That Claudia Gray is, of course, a great resource for her, but her story is just incredible. And I found myself more and more to be inspired by her as a character and through the mythology that she has. And Matt, I don't know if you want to weigh in on, are there any aspects of the Star Wars universe that you worked with for this book that kind of hit you in a profound way that you hadn't considered before?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, I think, like you said then, I think so many of these could have been 4 pages if we'd had the space. But yeah, I think for me, there were so many, but I think one that springs to mind is kind of the separatist structure, the separatist kind of explanation how they weren't really that bad. They had some quite valid concerns, and they were just unfortunately taken over by the Sith. So, I think there's some really interesting different kind of pivots on how you can see things and analyze things, and kind of, now that everything's out, you kind of can see everything hanging together, like Pablo said, and kind of you get that sense of all these bits and pieces slotting. I think, the Mandalorians as well, similarly, I loved that article and that sense of setting out, we've heard so many bits and pieces and kind of slotting together kind of, where things are in terms of the Clone Wars and where they are in Rebels. And, I think, yeah, there's some interesting bits.
Absolutely. There's a lot of interesting bits. And I think just the process of writing a book, I think, is a fascinating thing. All the different steps that go into it, perhaps, or some of the things that people are very curious about. And so, Pablo, I'll start with you on this one. Was there a section that caused the most challenge for you to write, whether that would be sort of the word count, or gosh, what do I leave in? What is absolutely key and essential to what I want to tell for this particular book? And how did you overcome that challenge?
Yeah, it is the assignment. Matt gave me some of the big sort of institutional elements of Star Wars. We're talking, I took on the Jedi as an order, the Sith as an order, the Republic, the First Order, the Resistance, and the Mandalorians and the New Republic. So these are all big institutional things that more often than not are treated as subtext as opposed to text. Often in our stories, we're dealing with the character and less about the institutions, and we're gleaning what we can from the institution through the actions of the characters and their surroundings, right? But as it happened, particularly in the case with the First Order and the Resistance, we got enough pieces, particularly from the filmmakers who were crafting the stories, of what they thought came before the events of the film. And as it stands right now, in order to gather those threads, you'd have to go to multiple sources in order to piece together, what that history was. So that was an opportunity to pull all those sources together, even though there still exists sizable gaps in that history because there's more story to tell. But, presented in such a way that it feels like you've got an understanding of how we got from episode 6 to episode 7, 8, and 9 in broad strokes, but still leave enough room for future storytelling because, as you know, the Mandalorian lives in that, space and it's charting new territory. So it's not a challenge that is unique to this book, because that's the Star Wars challenge in general. But this book made that challenge real and gave it a shape for you to navigate through.
Right. Very well said. And because you've done that work, now it's easy for people to kind of try to piece it together. So bravo. And Cole, what about you? Was there a particular section that for whatever reason caused the most challenge for you, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, well, I think the toughest one for me was actually a very small section. It was just a topic box, right? Which is just sort of inset, little aside. It's at the very beginning of the book, and it's the topic box that explains how Star Wars is this one connected story, except for the fact that there are some stories that aren't part of the modern storytelling line. So effectively trying to explain to people who may not be familiar about this idea of canon and legends and bonus points. I was trying not to use the word canon at all. It's a word we kind of try to stay away from. So how do I explain this thing that I think is important, because people should know that what makes Star Wars special is how all these stories play together. And this whole book is going to weave those stories in and out, but also know that there are some things out there that they might not find in this book. So doing that in very little real estate, trying to avoid the word canon entirely, was probably the biggest challenge. I hope I did it, but readers will have to let me know.
For me, it was an opportunity to sort of fill in some gaps in my knowledge that couldn't instantly come to the forefront. I did the section on crime and the underworld and some stuff with the Hutts, and so I had to refresh myself on a couple of arcs in the Clone Wars and revisit some sections of the story that it sort of kind of escaped my mind. So that was cool to do that. But to me, the biggest challenge, and this is the one I tell my students as we're talking about writing, and I'm referring to my seniors, it's easy to add when you're writing. It's really hard to kind of slice and dice and kind of narrow it down, because you have to be. I remember Dan Brooks telling me years ago on a blog, try to say as succinctly and as cleanly as possible what you're trying to say. So the words you use count, right? Because they have weight to them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a beautiful challenge for any writer, both new or experienced, that I think is something that's great fun. Let's go ahead and take a quick break. We will be back with much more from Pablo Hidalgo, Cole Horton, and Matt Jones. This is Coffee with Kenobi.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
MEI and Mouse Fan Travel is your one-stop shop for your vacation needs and your plans to Walt Disney World, Disneyland, or the cruise lines. Travel looks much different now than it did a couple of months ago, and with the opening of Walt Disney World and soon, hopefully, the opening of Disneyland, you need a place to go where you can trust, and they will help you figure out and navigate all the different circumstances and guidelines that Disney has put out for you. And I can say that we had our vacation modified, and as soon as dates were announced, MEI contacted me directly to help me reschedule, which is exactly what I was hoping to do. So if you are interested in rescheduling your vacation or want to try to plan a Walt Disney World, Disneyland vacation, or anywhere else you want to go on the planet, be sure to contact MEI and Mouse Fan Travel at www.coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel. Their signature service and expert advice will help you maximize your vacation time and dollar, and they will help you figure out all the different changes and modifications going on at the Disney theme parks. They are amazing, and I can tell you, honestly, from the bottom of my heart, the peace of mind that Becky Menken and the crew at MEI and Mouse Fan Travel have given me is invaluable. If you're interested at all, again, go to www.coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel. Along with the challenge, there's the most reward. So, Cole, we'll just start with you on this. Was there a section that was the most rewarding for you, and why is that?
Yeah, probably the overview of the galaxy itself. So that portion that has the map, the kind of lead-off timeline as well. There's going to be timelines throughout the book, and those are really specific to whatever topic those individual pages or chapters are covering. But I had to find what are those absolute must-know, really highest order kind of events that need to be on that timeline. But also, because this is the text that accompanies the map, get to explain really what all those regions are, how all the pieces of the map are different, sort of the character that these different areas of the galaxy have taken on, and explain the very important concept that the galaxy is massive. In fact, it's so massive that full control over it is essentially impossible. And that's a really important theme, right? Because that's going to come up in the most recent trilogy of films, right? Because that's how the remnants of the Empire and later the First Order and more can go hide. These are themes that are going to keep coming up in future storytelling as well. So I knew I wanted to make sure that that could come across, that scale of this galaxy, and then what that means and why it's so rich then for conflict.
I love it. I love it. Pablo, what about you? I mean, I feel it's silly even asking you this because your expansive knowledge and your experience in Lucasfilm is obviously an incredible thing. But was there a certain section? I mean, obviously, I guess I maybe already know the answer. The most rewarding thing for you was writing a book with Cole and me, probably. But besides that,
Clearly.
What else was the most rewarding part?
Clearly, that was a bucket list item that I'm able to cross off right now. No, honestly, I can't take for granted that I think this was the first sort of focused source material treatment that The Mandalorian had gotten, because it was still new, and the filmmakers, in this case Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni, are very protective about that particular story that they're crafting, and so at the time there really wasn't much out there. And I say that at the time, even though we're just talking about like January when this was written and this just came out. So, so it was rare to be able to talk about that character and what we were exposed to in season one, but it's in there. And even in that regard, we were able to put in some information that wasn't evident on the screen, like the name of his home planet. And I saw this get picked up because people are just hungry for any sort of Mandalorian information. So Actatina, the place where we see the flashback of the super battle droids and the Mandalorians fighting, did not have a name in the series at all that got surfaced through dialogue or anything. So it appeared in this book first. And now, here we are, Matt and I are knee deep in the Mandalorian visual guide. So I feel like this was almost like a test run to start talking about this topic. And now that those doors have been opened, we're able to get into more detail. So I was pretty happy with how that turned out.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And Matt, what about you? Obviously, you've worked on Star Wars for a while. It's a franchise that's near and dear to your heart. Was there a particular aspect of this book that you found particularly rewarding?
I think it's so hard to call. I mean, can I just say all of it? I mean, for me, I'm so glad that it kind of came together, because I was kind of thinking about how to structure this big, massive thing and how to get it into a book, and seeing it all come together and work well. But I mean, just everything that each of you brought to it, and kind of, other sections that, the institutions for me, like Pablo said, Ultimate Star Wars, will mention the New Republic or the Republic hundreds of times. And that was my first book and as an intern. And I watched Star Wars for 2 weeks to help organize that book. So I love that book too. But I think both of them sit together for me. It's kind of this one, you can really go into detail on the big things. And then you can have the other books that kind of will supplement that, like complete locations for the galaxy. So it's kind of, for me, it's filling a really nice niche.
Absolutely. Well, you also, as the editor, the project editor for this, you worked with 3 different authors on one title. So what is it like to work with each of us, and how did our different styles sort of complement one another for you? Because when I look through this, and we joked about this before we started, sometimes I look through sections and I would think, okay, did I write this? Who wrote this? I feel like the way you're able to help us kind of find our voices, I feel like it blended very beautifully together.
Yeah, I mean, you were all great to work with. What else can I say? It was really, really amazing. I think you all got the brief really, really well, because it's quite a different DK book, and it's not an easy one doing essays necessarily. For me, editing, it's not something that I've done too much of myself. But yeah, it was really, I think all of you just kind of really synced and kind of really got that DK approach to things, where you've not got a strong distinct author voice, each of you, for this title. It's all kind of flows, and now I'm reading back over it and I can't really remember, like you say, who did what, but I'm sure you all did a fair bit of it.
So it's not true that Cole just only wanted blue M&Ms, like that kind of no diva behavior from Cole this time around?
Well, I make no promises about no diva behavior, but I try not to be too difficult. Matt can check me.
No, none of you were difficult at all. It was.
I had to admit, before this call, I had to dig up some old emails to remember what it is I wrote, because it not only just reading through it, flipping through it, you're right, it does kind of all blend together really nicely. But also 2020 has been such a strange year that January feels like a decade ago. So, just looking through all that stuff, I needed a refresher.
I can second that. I wrote this book shortly after we had our first child, and I had a baby and no sleep. And writing this, that period in January is just a blur to me.
Wow. Well, congratulations, man. That's fantastic. I think the funny thing for people to say to me is, well, gosh, you're a teacher, and you were teaching remotely from the pandemic. You must have had all kinds of time to write this book. And I said, well, actually, it was turned in before everybody was quarantined, so it really didn't have any kind of an impact at all as far as that goes. But that's kind of the challenge, isn't it? I mean, as writing, when you're writing a book or whatever you're doing, the rest of your life doesn't stop. You're still expected to do your day job and to take care of your families and to do other things that are not Star Wars related, because man does not live on Star Wars alone, nor should he. So I think that's a great aspect, and I think it's just a good exercise in balance and just in passion. So without giving away any spoilers, because we want people to buy the book, we want people to read the book, I do believe it's full of rich content that will start conversations and maybe put an end to conversations, just kind of keep dialogue going in a fun, positive, engaging way. So, Pablo, is there anything that you can sort of let us glean onto that fans can hope to learn about the Star Wars universe through the Star Wars book?
I think it's a good reminder on how deep the universe is, and to sort of challenge your assumptions about it. It's a small tidbit, but I remember when The Mandalorian came out and the conversation came about, the followers of the way and how he never takes off his helmet. And instantly people are like, well, what about Sabine? Are we forgetting about Sabine? And it's sort of like, well, Filoni created Sabine as well. Of course he didn't forget about her. So having an entry on Mandalorians that reminds you that it's not just this monolithic culture, that there are stripes and flavors in there, without necessarily drowning you with a ton of information, just enough information to remind you that there's more to things than you may be aware of. I think that becomes really helpful, particularly in cases where you may have questions coming out of content. So I'm like, why did that happen, or who was that, or what's the nature of this? Absolutely,
and we certainly have seen our share of that, to be certain. Cole, what about you? Is there a certain thing that you think through what you've experienced with the Star Wars book that you feel like fans can hope to learn about the universe?
Yeah, I would say, of course, read the essays, pore over those, but spend some time with the timelines. They really do help put everything into context, and you can see these connected events in a really great way there. And I find those to have been particularly rewarding. And they fit so well with this sort of unique style that this book takes. The other thing I'd throw out there is there are more than a few little hints and references to some video games. Unfortunately, Matt was not able to meet my request of multiple full-page spreads about BD1 from Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. That was an explicit request I made multiple times. And we weren't able to put all of that real estate towards them, but you're going to see plenty of those references in there because I just can't help myself.
I love it. It was either that or the blue M&Ms. You got the M&Ms.
Yeah, yeah. I'm still waiting for my M&Ms, Matt. Probably lost between here and England somewhere. That's fine. Take your time.
I'll get on it straight away. But post offices might be shut. But yeah. BD got a picture. I'm sure he got a pretty big picture from memory.
Oh,
but,
yeah. Little caption as well. We did all right. And there are
so.
some Squadrons things in there as well. So if anyone's playing Star Wars Squadrons, want to learn a little more, we knew that this book would align very nicely with that release as well. So it was good to have worked on both.
Fantastic. Matt, anything that you wanted to add to that as far as what people can hope to learn from the Star Wars book?
I think that, like everyone said, I'm trying to think if there's any other bits. I think I also gave Pablo Bounty Hunters. Sorry, I feel like I gave you all the tough ones, Pablo. But I think there's some really interesting stuff in that article and kind of setting out what the guild is kind of maybe in the earlier films and kind of 4, 5, 6 and 1, 2, 3. So I think there's some interesting stuff in that article too. But there's tidbits throughout the whole book, I'd say, that are interesting. And I remember when Cole was putting these references in and being like, just trust me on them, because I don't even think Squadrons was revealed at that point.
No, it hadn't been. Yeah, I had to put notes in the manuscript saying, please don't pull this out. I promise this will pay off later, whether you realize it or not. And everybody was good sports about that.
Yeah.
Well, and the I think, at least, and I guess what I would point to, what people can learn from the Star Wars book, it's something that one of the things that I'm the most proud of as well. I think there's a lot there about sort of how we look at the Force and the Skywalkers. I really was honored to be able to write about the Skywalker history, which, at first blush is like, well, of course we already know this stuff. It's been going on for years and years, for over 40 years. But to look at it differently and to try to pick out thematic moments that I think are the most crucial to understanding what makes them tick, because I think there are nuanced characters, and I think that that's fascinating. Plus, I think it also was able to explore something that thematically Star Wars has always been so good at, and that's the concept of family, not always through blood, but just through how you get to know people from different walks of life and background and races and creeds and colors, and how we have so much more in common than we do differently. And I think there's a lot there that deserves to be explored. I think, as Mark Twain often said, fiction is obliged to tell the truth. So we're able to look at things, at hard truths in our real world, but if you look at them through the lens of fiction, it is able to open up dialogue. And I really am proud of how the book does that. Stay tuned. We're going to do a quick little break here, and we're going to be back to close out this conversation and get a little more insights from Pablo, Cole, and Matt. This is Coffee with Kenobi.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
That's going to do it for this week's show. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to have a cup of coffee with me, and for helping to spread the word about our Star Wars family we've got here at Coffee with Kenobi. Be sure to tune in Monday nights at 8 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on Facebook Live at www.coffeewithkenobi.com/live or www.facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi and have a cup of coffee, tea, or any beverage of your choosing with me as we continue the conversation. To join us in the CWK Cafe, which is our Facebook group, and share your Star Wars thoughts, comments, reviews, and opinions in a family-friendly, spoiler-free place that is also drama-free, go to www.coffeewithkenobi.com/community and be part of the conversation, talk about this week's show, or just talk about some Star Wars. It is a lot of fun, and you'll make some new friends as well as catch up with longtime friends along the way. I also want to thank all of the new and longtime members of the CWK Alliance and let you know how much I appreciate your help and encouragement. A big thank you to our CWK Alliance members, Mary Perdue, Jason Hall, Dennis Keithley, Ross Hallivan, Cato McNichol, Alexander Moylan, Jim Capron, Smooth Rivera, Tyler Pompa, Frank Mulder, Colby Mead, LJ Souter, Daz Davies, Dustin Mills, Robert Avila, Terry King, Jeff Ellis, David Nicely, Chris Gavarka, Angela Sauce, Aaron Harris, Greg McLaughlin, Eric Struthers, Christine Turk, Brian McKinney, Alex Procasio, Hannah, Susan Gray, Ian Thompson, Dan Ream, Christian Dale, JC Poe, Ed Kimoto, Blake Weaver, Chelsea Sansbury, Yancey Evans, Craig Hargrove, Chris Metz, Connie Shee, Mark Suter, Jared Cantor, Kurt McKellen, Thea Selby, and Simbat Defterdarian. If you want to join the CWK Alliance, be sure to go to www.coffeewithkenobi.com/CWK Alliance and sign up today. Not only will you help out Coffee with Kenobi, but you also get access to CWK Pour-Over, the exclusive weekly podcast not heard anywhere else. It's a great way to support and help out the show, and 10% of your monthly contributions go directly to the St. Jude Children's Hospital to support the incredibly important work they are doing to help these brave children and their families. Plus, contributors at the CWK All-Star level can watch a video podcast of CWK Pour-Over hosted by me, Tom Gross, and Corey Clubb. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. In addition to being part of the community on Facebook, please don't forget to visit our website at www.coffeewithkenobi.com for Star Wars news, announcements, reviews, live video, and so much more. If you have a question for me or just want to share your thoughts on the air, please feel free to reach out to me at danz@coffeewithkenobi.com, and I'll share them on the show. You can also connect with me on Twitter at Mr. Zer, MRZEHR. There are also a lot of ways to connect with me and Coffee with Kenobi on social media. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Give us a like on Facebook at facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi, and check us out on Pinterest. You can find me twice a month on the podcast Looking at Lucasfilm, part of the Jim Hill Media Podcast Network, and you can find my writing on CWK's website, as well as StarWars.com, where I'm an official blogger there, as well as on IGN, where I contribute articles on Star Wars, as well as other popular culture topics. And if you're considering starting a podcast or a blog, let me know how I can help you get started and help you make your creative vision a reality. Be sure to check out danzmedia.com and we can get the process started. I'm also available to come to your school, conference, business, or organization to talk about how to tap into your strengths and help you bring out your very best. You can take that first step into a larger world. Thanks as always to our CWK sponsors, especially MEI and Mouse Fan Travel, our travel partner and your one-stop shop for all things Walt Disney World, Disneyland, the Disney Cruise Lines, or anywhere on the planet. Please go to www.coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel to book your magical vacation and help support Coffee with Kenobi in the process. And don't forget to pre-order my brand new book that I wrote alongside Pablo Hidalgo and Cole Horton, the Star Wars book published by DK. Be sure to pre-order your copy of the Star Wars book today. I can't wait to share it with each and every one of you. If you like the show, please tweet out that you're listening, share it on Facebook, or invite your friends and family to tune in and share a cup of coffee with us. And if the Force is especially with you, please take a couple of minutes to rate and review the show on iTunes or Google Podcasts. Every review makes a huge difference and helps to spread the word. Go to iTunes and search Coffee with Kenobi and you'll see the show there. My circle of friends has grown so much because of this podcast and each and every one of you, and it means so much to me that we have such a wonderful Star Wars community. Thank you all so much for all you do. Plus, it was fun to write a glossary. I'd never written a glossary before. I got a big kick out of that. That might have been one of my favorite things to write about.
Yeah, somebody has to write these things?
Sorry.
No, all good. Gentlemen, thank you all so very much picking your brains and reflecting on this wonderful process that is the Star Wars book. Cole, where can everybody reach out to you if they want to ask you any questions or continue the conversation?
Yeah, they can find me on Twitter or Instagram at Cole Horton.
I love it. And Pablo, they can reach out to you at 411. Is that correct?
That's pretty much it. It's basically, if you shine a light into the sky on a cloudy day, that's your best bet at getting a hold of me.
I did that whenever I'd ask Pablo questions, but I had to stand on my left pinky toe, and it was really awkward, but it really worked out. It was worth it. And Matt, if people want to say hello to you, how can they do so?
They could reach out to DK Books. On Instagram or Twitter. I'm not not on the social media.
That's probably not a bad thing. All right. Well, again, thank you all, gentlemen, so very much. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll talk with you soon. Everybody go out and buy the Star Wars book.
Thanks, Dad.
Cheers.
I've been looking forward to this interview for such a long time, and I'm thrilled to be able to bring you all along for the conversation. You heard the fun, the chemistry we all have. It was a great experience, and it's been so much fun sharing it with each and every one of you. I also want to spend a special thank you to everyone who came out to Eli's Coffee last weekend for the book signing. We are going to have another one in the very near future. Be on the lookout on Coffee with Kenobi's social media, and stay tuned to the podcast here on Coffee with Kenobi for more information on that. We are going to be gearing up for Season 2 of The Mandalorian, and just like Season 1, you can expect complete coverage of the season, the series, the episodes. And we'll also have special guests each week, of course, to talk about The Mandalorian and the specific episodes that you just got to experience. Plus, we'll be doing some top 5s to celebrate each episode of The Mandalorian on Facebook Live every Monday night at 8 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time. So while you're watching it, get your top 5s ready and join us on Facebook Live. Thank you so very much for your continual support and kindness towards me, the Star Wars book, and everything going on in the world of Coffee with Kenobi and this amazing Star Wars family that I am so honored to be a part of. Until next time, everybody, this is the podcast you're looking for.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.